Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. MBOM is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at MBOM, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I am so excited and grateful that you've decided to join me for today's episode of the show. Today on the podcast, I am very excited to be joined by Jessie Johnson. Jessie is a success and mindset coach, and she works specifically with spiritual entrepreneurs such as yoga teachers, in addition to master healers and a range of other spiritual teachers. And she really helps entrepreneurs increase their income by a factor of 10 at a minimum through coaching. And she coaches them through how to use their gifts to master sales. So one of the things that we've talked a bit about on the podcast is how sales doesn't have to be icky. And this is a topic I love diving into with guests because I find sales really tricky. I find it challenging. And I also really firmly believe that we can sell the things that we are passionate about without it being icky. And so Jessie and I really dive into that in this episode of the podcast. We talk about how she became a success and mindset coach, how she got interested in this as a career. We talked about some of the biggest challenges that she sees yoga teachers facing when it comes to success and mindset. She also talks about her philosophies and teachings around sales, and she actually has 6 key steps that she walks us through. We also dive into a little bit around the money side of things, and if we've been struggling accepting money, particularly during the pandemic that we've been in, how do we shift our mindset and start bringing in more abundance and feel confident with that? So there is a ton of good stuff in here. Jessie is absolutely incredible, and I really hope that you guys enjoy this episode of the show. Before we dive into it, just a quick word from our sponsor, OfferingTree. This episode is brought to you by OfferingTree. When you're a yoga teacher and you're trying to build your digital presence, it can be daunting, especially right now when you are trying to take your offerings online as fast as possible. OfferingTree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one account, you can create a website in minutes that has your schedule built right in. They also have email marketing tools to collect email addresses, send newsletters, and automated emails to your subscribers. It all works seamlessly together with one account and one subscription. Forget spending all your time and energy just trying to remember what account does what and what your login information is. On top of that, OfferingTree has an embedded scheduling feature, so if you already have a website that you love, you can use it for online payments and scheduling. They have also just announced that they now have Stripe integration so that people from Canada, the UK, Australia, and 30 plus countries can accept payments using OfferingTree. This is something that a lot of people have been asking for, and it is finally live. So that is super exciting. To learn more about what OfferingTree can do for your digital presence, visit offeringtree.com/MBOM. OfferingTree has been supporting MBOM for over a year now, and I not only love the product, but I also love the people. And OfferingTree is also providing special pricing for MBOM listeners. So be sure to visit offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive your discount. All right, now on to the episode. Welcome to the podcast today, Jessie. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
I'm so honored to be here, Amanda. It's really, really fun. This is a long time coming.
Yeah. This is going to be a really awesome conversation. I already feel it. And I'm so excited for everything that we're going to dive into. And just to start with, where are you joining me from today?
I'm in Los Angeles, California. I'm coming from my home.
Oh, nice. That's awesome. You must be having much better weather than I'm having up here in Alberta, Canada.
Yeah, it's pretty fantastic here all the time. We definitely moved here for the sunshine.
Yeah, I might be considering a move to California at this point. We're having not great weather, but I do live in the mountains, so that's nice. I won't complain.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, I'm really excited to dive in with you, about the different challenges that people have been having during, this current crisis and just mindset in general. But I think a good place to start is to back up a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey becoming a success and mindset coach?
Yeah, absolutely. I started my professional career in New York City public schools where I was a math teacher and then a math coach. So I had my own classroom for 7 years, and then I shifted to, I guess you could say, more of a leadership position where I was going into the classrooms of math teachers all over New York City and supporting them in studying their practice and really paying attention to student learning and how they could improve. And it's an interesting thing because teachers are so busy, like so many of us, that if they don't have someone to kind of demand that they stop and reflect, it's very easy for them to just get lost in the weeds. And all that it took was just me showing up. And I mean, I shouldn't say there was nothing else, but that just me showing up was huge for these teachers, to just have someone treat them like a professional and help ask reflective questions completely changed their relationship to their practice. So that's really my coaching education came from coaching educators.
Yeah.
And I did that for 5 years. And in 2015, I guess, most of that year, I just was feeling a little like I was struggling with problems that I was starting to feel like I didn't actually have a whole lot of agency to solve, like system level problems that I was not in a position to change. And in fact, all the progress that me and my teachers were making was sort of systemically being undermined. It's like we'd take a step forward, and then somehow or other the bureaucracy of the school system would take us 2 steps backwards. And so I started looking for what else I could do. And it was a real mystery to me for a long time, because I didn't want to be a principal. I didn't want to be working for the Board of Education. I was super good at what I did, and I couldn't think of any, like I just didn't have a framework in my own mind for where else my skill set might be useful. But I knew I wanted to make more money, not less. I knew I wanted to have more autonomy, more freedom, not less. And I knew I wanted more integration of my artistic and spiritual and professional lives, not less. And so I began a search for what this next phase of my career might be, and ended up reconnecting with an old math teacher friend of mine who had become a life coach. And I would say that up until that point, I had probably met some life coaches, but my perception of life coaching at that time was that it was something that broke hippies did. and that I just didn't recognize that was a potential career path for me. But when I talked with my friend, it was like, oh, this is a different thing than what I thought it was, because she is the most excellent, exquisite in everything she does. And so I hired her to help me. I didn't even fully know when I hired her, I was hiring her to help me start a business. That like, I figured that out about a week or two into the coaching, but like it was, I didn't even understand that the thing that was missing for me was entrepreneurship. So I hired her. She helped me create my business and learn to sell and figure out how to basically translate my professional expertise into this slightly different context. And the context in the beginning was retreat leaders, because I wanted to really leverage my experience working in education in a spiritual education context. So it's still retreat leaders, but the branding has shifted a little bit. But right, so I was coaching spiritual educators, and like I would say that maybe a week or two, this was also a fast realization, into working with my clients, I just realized that they didn't know how to make money. They weren't thinking about money. And so all the work that I wanted to do with them around curriculum building and thinking about impact, it was sort of irrelevant, because if they didn't know how to fill the room, they weren't going to make enough money to be able to do it again. And so almost like I was like guided. I felt like the money piece was not in my mind when I started, and it was given to me, demanded of me. And so that very early on, I really have been focusing on the intersection of spirituality and money, and supporting spiritual teachers and healers in learning how to make money, how to sell in a way that feels really authentic and empowered to them. And now I'm really focused on helping those people build multiple 6 and 7 figure businesses. So not just a little bit of money, but really like going big.
That's amazing. There's so much good stuff in there. I was like, I have a million questions. But I just wanted to acknowledge, I mean, it's such a cool journey to hear about because, going from working in schools and with like on the math side of things to working with retreat leaders, that's like leaps and bounds different. But as you were talking, I was like, I hear this connection so clearly in terms of like how you got there. So I think it's just wanted to acknowledge like making that jump. I feel like it's very brave and it was probably a big career move and stuff like that. And then also just really grateful that you're working in the same space that I'm in now, because I have the same thing with yoga teachers that I work with and studio owners that I work with, this money side of things. It's so hard to talk about the other parts of it when accepting money is just not something that they want to do or that they feel comfortable doing.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think there's two things about that I want to throw in. One is, and I'll just say before that I found your podcast early on in my business. I don't remember exactly when, but I that's why I'm like, this is a long time coming. Like I've been watching you from afar talk about these same issues. And so it's very satisfying to be here with you. So one of the things is that, like, actually predating the story I just told you, I was an art student and like very artsy fartsy art student. And my internships with one of my mentors in particular really focused on consciously accepting that there is a business to making art. There's making art, and then there's the business of being an artist. And I think that this is similar. It's got to be true in all career paths, but I think it's a little bit of a blind spot for artists as well as spiritual teachers, that like there's the spiritual practice and then there's the business of teaching spirituality or teaching yoga or teaching coaching or teaching transformation in whatever path people do. And that concept was familiar to me. And I think that helped me go as far as I went in my business as quickly as I went. Because I started my business I had my first client in January of 2016. And in February of 2018, I celebrated my first 7-figure year. So like I made this massive, massive leap in my own financial success very, very quickly. And so the second thing is that in the process of doing that, what I found is that although it's useful to think about the business as business, in fact, my relationship with money and sales in particular have become just other tools in my spiritual practice kit. They're not like, oh, there's this separate thing that's not spiritual that I'll do so that I can live my spiritual life and have my spiritual business. It's like my relationship to money and my relationship to sales and the way that I teach money mindset and the way that I teach sales, it's non-different. There's no separation. It's just a new context to apply the same principles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And, thank you for the kind words about the podcast as well. It's really cool to hear that you were listening, way back when you just started your business, and also to hear like how much success you've had in your business through, your own breakthroughs and then just being able to help other people. But I love what you're talking about not separating them, because I do think that sometimes there is this almost disconnect, like, okay, I'll get comfortable enough with money and selling so that I can have my practice and, live my life and do this thing that I love. Yet I think that like weaving them in and having it as another tool, as you said, is a really great way to think about doing that. And so I'm curious if we can dive into that a little bit more. I know you teach like kind of the philosophical side and around like sales and money and having this mindset. Can we dive into that a little bit?
I would love to. This is my favorite subject.
Awesome. So for somebody who's like totally uncomfortable with this, or maybe this is the first time they're kind of listening to something about this, where do you even start with sales and money mindset?
So, oh gosh, there's two things that just came to mind. One is the understanding that there's a financial component to everything. I think this was like a big wake up for me as a spiritual person, because I started meditating very, very seriously when I started teaching, because teaching was the hardest thing I'd ever done. And I was like, holy shit, I got it. Like, I needed extra support. And so I started meditating really seriously, at least once a day. I went on retreat all the time and was super obsessed with my spiritual community, my spiritual practice. And so when I heard that, like, so I was, in other words, my pre-business life was filled with activities and things that I didn't really associate money as being a part of, right? Most meditation communities, I mean, you pay for the retreat, but it wasn't really the focus. And most people were trying to minimize their costs all the time. Many of the retreat venues or ashrams were offering ways to be there without paying. It was like in general donation based, all that kind of sort of culture. And then my professional life in schools, we never talked about money. I mean, ever. Even though I taught math, we basically, it was not like there was any transactional activity around money. So when my first mentor shared this principle with me, it was a little bit like, what? And I really challenged myself to think about it. Could I find anything that didn't have a financial component? And the more that I thought about it, the more that I looked, the more that I researched, I just was able to kind of convince myself that actually there is a financial component to everything, at least in 2020. Mm-hmm. Like maybe 200 years ago, there wasn't. But now in this culture, there absolutely is. There's nothing that isn't touched by money. There's nothing, no conversation that doesn't have a financial element. And so as spiritual seekers and spiritual practitioners, and especially spiritual leaders, it's our responsibility to bring our consciousness to everything in our lives. And money is both one of those things in our lives, but it's also a tool, because if money touches everything, just like the breath, right? Like the reason that we focus on the breath so often in meditation is because it's available all the time. It's a very good object of meditation because we can come back to it over and over again. And money is the same way, because there's money everywhere. There's a financial component to everything. And so when we start to use money as a tool for awakening, we have opportunities to go deeper everywhere. So that's a big kind of philosophical piece. Much more practically, I would invite all people who are listening to just write down your average monthly income. Don't worry about precision here. Just estimate. Maybe it's a couple $1,000s a month. Maybe it's $10,000 a month. It doesn't really matter. Just sort of write that number down, whatever you think it is. And take a moment to feel what that number means to you, what it does to you, how it feels to bring that money in, how it feels to spend that money, because I'm sure that you're spending most of what you bring in. Even if you're allocating it for savings or retirement, you can kind of, it's like it's going in and coming out, coming in and going out. Then the second step of the exercise is to add a 0 on the end of that number. So if you wrote down 3,000, now you're looking at 30,000. If you wrote down 10,000, now you're looking at 100,000. And just imagine how your life would be different if that new number was your average monthly income. What would it feel like for that money to come in every month? What would it feel like for you to spend that money every month? This is a really simple exercise for just feeling into what your relationship to money is right now. Both the money that you're currently earning and also the potential that you have. Because one of the things I help my clients with is 10xing their income very, very quickly. Not everybody wants to do that. That's fine. You don't need to set this new number as your goal, but it just gives you a way to feel into something concrete. When I do this exercise with groups, I like to ask them what feelings come up when they look at that new number. And in every room I've done this, there's a huge range of feelings. So there's excitement, there's possibility, there's relief, there's joy, there's a sense of confidence and mastery. There's also always in the room, and I think in most people individually, there's also anxiety, feeling of disbelief, a sense of impossibility, like how could that happen? And immediately on the heels of that is a kind of despair or discouragement. So it's also a really good tool, again, for those of us that are like, this is so satisfying to talk to you about this, Amanda, because everyone that's listening is already aware of these spiritual tools, already self-reflective, already in the awakening process. So you guys are like in the know.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever comes up around money just shows you your growth edge, shows you where you have more transformation to do.
Yeah, yeah, I love that, and I'm sure that there are lots of different feelings coming up, and I'm curious, like in terms of like more of the yoga teachers, I feel like something I hear a lot, and I'd be curious to know if you do the same. Is like, well, I don't need that much money.
Of course. So that's an interesting question, or an interesting word, need. My immediate association to that comes from childhood, being in the grocery store or the toy store with mom or dad and wanting something and having them say to me, honey, you don't need that. Like, I think it may be true. That you don't need, for some reason, I'm just sticking with this $30,000 a month. So that's not going to be, if that doesn't feel resonant for you, then that's not going to be motivation. And that's part of the purpose of the exercise. Like, try on the numbers, see what happens to you. Is there something there? For spiritual folks, I think there's two things totally separate from need that are the reason to focus on money. One is because, in my opinion, it is the blind spot in most spiritual communities. And so it's worthwhile to lean into it just because it's our growth edge as a community. It's our growth edge as spiritual leaders to bring our consciousness to this subject. And one of the best ways to bring our consciousness there is just to start setting financial goals. It doesn't have to be 10x, doesn't have to be a particular huge number, but just to find your own mastery, your own sense of personal power, that you don't have to just take what comes to you, but that there's actually a collaboration with the divine, where you get to say, oh, maybe like, let's see what happens if I go this direction, and then see how you can get there. But the second thing, and I think this is even more empowering, particularly for spiritual folks, is to think about how many people you could serve with that money. Mm-hmm. So you don't need it, but freaking charities all over the world do. You may not need it, but there's widows in India who are starving and unemployed because they're considered less than by their culture, right? Like, there are organizations all over the world who are designed to serve those people. And when you think about the biggest, most impactful leaders in spiritual history, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, like, these people had immense financial resources behind them. Mother Teresa, I just found this out recently, Mother Teresa sold $100 million in books alone. Whoa.
That's amazing.
So if you look, I mean, like Oprah, Deepak Chopra, like these people that are it's not, I don't want to say 100% equality, right? Like, it's not just that however much money you make determines your impact, but there is a relationship there. And a yoga teacher that's scrounging because they're undercharging and under earning can't even engage in that conversation. They can't even think about that because they're busy trying to pay the rent. Mm-hmm. So there's a sweet spot for everyone. In terms of the number may not be driven by need. And in fact, I would say that that shouldn't be the driver. Like, we're not here to talk about scarcity, and need is about scarcity. We're here to talk about surplus. We're here to talk about abundance. We're here to talk about prosperity. Why? So that you have more to give, so that you can teach more, so that you can share that financial integration with your people, so that you're not trying to decide, do I take care of me or do I take care of them? Because you know you're taken care of. And not just on the soul level. We are all taken care of on the soul level, but on the material level as well. Mm-hmm. That when the material body is taken care of, when the material life is taken care of, there's a lot more resources that we have to both cultivate spiritually internally and also focus on the spiritual service that we're doing in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I'm glad you brought up the need versus want, and then also just looking at, what we could do with that money. Because I think for some people, I very much could picture myself when you were talking about the need versus want as a little kid in the toy store and the grocery store, same things like, Mom, I really want this. Like, you don't need that though. And it is interesting. I was just having a conversation earlier today with somebody about how, our conditioning in our childhood, and no fault to our parents, but our conditioning in childhood and the things that we were told really formed our views. And I think it's, a lot of us, and I know myself included, can relate to this idea of like, okay, well, I don't need to make $40,000 a month. I don't need to make $100,000 a month. But when you think about what you could do with that and what you could do to benefit the world, I think that that's a pretty cool thing. And I'm a really big fan of like, we can't pour from an empty cup. And I think that that's what a lot of the like starving artists and, yoga teachers are certainly in there, where it's like, we give, but our cup is empty. And it's like, how can you teach yoga and feel good about giving that service if you can't even pay your rent? Like, to me, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, I am with you 100%. And I would even go further, and maybe at the risk of being a little provocative, but say that it's actually out of integrity. It's like it's against the teachings for that conflict to be present. The teachings are not asking for self-sacrifice. There is this teaching of renunciation in all spiritual lineages. All of them include renunciation. But it's not renunciation for the purpose of suffering. It's renunciation for the purpose of freedom. And I think that a lot of people lose sight of that and do the renunciation because they think it's the spiritual thing to do, which is actually a very egotistical thing. It's like an anti-spiritual thing. And in fact, I think twofold, like there are times when renunciation is really important. And then there's times when it's time to renounce the renunciation. Like the spiritual ancestral story that we have inherited is that in order to be spiritual, you have to be poor. And that's just always been a lie. I mean, Mother Teresa, I think that story about her is so powerful. She didn't keep the money, obviously, but she was a big freaking earner. Come on, that's incredible. 100 million. And this is like not with inflation. So $100 million during her lifetime. And this is just an immense amount of resource to be able to bring to the table. So I'm obviously, I could rant about this for many hours, but I'm very passionate about yoga teachers, spiritual teachers of all kinds, meditation teachers, breathwork teachers, retreat leaders, transformational coaches, all of these people really looking, like really opening their eyes and looking, what am I actually doing around money? How much of it is coming from past conditioning? How much of it is coming from a cultural program? How much of it is coming from some misconception of a spiritual teaching that I'm using to reinforce my ego? Like, what would it look like for me? That's why I like the 10x, like adding a zero to your income exercise, because it just kind of pops you into a new mental state. And then you work with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. It's like a total, it's like a total 180. I mean, 180 is probably not the best way to describe it. Like 10x is a perfect way to describe it, but it's like really helping you see the potential of what could happen, which I really love. And I think that that's a perfect way to think about your money story, because I think if you go, oh, well, if you're making, let's continue with your example of the 3,000 and 30,000. If you're making 3,000 per month right now, and how would it feel if you made 5,000? I think for most of us, we would be like, oh, that would be awesome. It means that I can pay my bills without worry. I can save money for my taxes. I can have a little bit of extra for things like birthday presents and wedding gifts and, going on vacations and stuff like that. Like most people, I think, would acknowledge that a little jump would feel good. But I think that big jump like really kind of hits that. Like, what are your stories and your beliefs around money? Like, how do you actually feel about making money in your business?
I love that distinction. I've never heard anyone say that before, but I totally agree with you. I think that's deeply insightful. It helps me understand more about why I like the exercise so much. That's great.
Hi, friends. We're just taking a quick little break from the podcast to talk about the one-on-one consultation work that I do with yoga teachers. I'm not sure if you knew, but I am actually a yoga business coach on top of being a yoga teacher and a yoga business podcast host. One of the things that I love most is sitting down with a client one-on-one and talking about their business. If you think that I get dorky about the business of yoga on this podcast, you have no idea until you work with me one-on-one. I love getting into the nitty-gritty of organizing your day, organizing monthly or even yearly goals. I love talking about how to grow your audience, build your business, and add in all the elements of the business side of being a yoga teacher that you probably weren't taught in yoga teacher training, like building a website, having an email list, adding a freebie to your website for your email list, honing in on who your dream student is, what the niche you like to teach is, and creating programs around that. So if this sounds like something that you would love to dive into over the next couple of months, please reach out. You can head on over to mbmyoga.com/consulting to book a call, or send me an email at info@mbmyoga.com and we can chat. All right, back to the episode. This is something I've been working on in 2020, is this idea of like, okay, I broke down a lot of barriers with my own money story in 2018, I think it was. And I worked really hard at like what was really ingrained in my mental patterns, my thought patterns, my speaking patterns around money, and broke that down so that I could start letting money come into my business more. And I noticed, starting this year that okay, there's still some blocks there, especially around the idea of making more money. You know what I mean? Because it's like there's a certain level where you feel like, oh, okay, it's totally appropriate for me to make this amount of money. But when you start thinking about these big amounts of money, I mean, we're constantly bombarded with the idea that making a lot of money is selfish. And I think that for me, I'm like, I want to have money, like not just so that I can sit over here and like take a bath in money. That's not what I want to do, but I want to be able to, support myself and my family and, do great things and help other people. Like I would love to give everyone I know a birthday gift every year. Like I don't have the financial capacity to do that right now. So, it's interesting to think about that different dynamic with the amounts.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that example. It's just like that's a really good place to go for those that are listening. If you're like interested in this and trying to lean in, to just get visionary about what would you spend money on if you had a bunch of money right now. What would be different? Like how would you spend it differently? And pay attention to whatever lights you up about that. One of the things that I didn't know, but that we haven't talked about, and I'll just mention, is that I have a huge team now. I would never be able to employ these people if I didn't make the kind of money that I make in my business. I'm particularly aware of it during quarantine, because we've actually expanded our team during quarantine. When a lot of other businesses are shutting down, we are in a position to hire some of those people who are potentially losing their jobs to come make money doing something that they're fantastic at and that they love. That's I feel great about that every day, because working for me is probably one of the dream jobs. Like whoever it is that works for me, they've got a great situation. We don't really hire anyone who doesn't feel that way about the job. So it's an ideal situation for someone who wants to work for someone else's vision. And I can do that because I know how to bring in whatever amount of money my team and company need whenever we need it. That's a radical thing. So you mentioned something about this before. This is also a big principle. Financial freedom isn't having a number in the bank. There's people who have billions of dollars and still don't feel financially free. Kanye West did an interview with, I'm trying to remember who this interview was with. I don't remember. I watched this maybe 6 months ago, but this was like last year. Last year, Kanye West made hundreds of millions of dollars. And at the end of the year was like $70 million in debt.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like a complete, like, who would think that? He sort of represents this epic abundance, right? He's like the king of hip hop in a big way. And sort of, it was wonderfully generous, I thought, of him to share that. And then he actually talked about getting much more direct in his relationship with God, writing his new album, doing this tour in the churches. And it was because of that, like, again, using spiritual practice, using his consciousness work, using his relationship with the divine, that actually helped him clean up his financial system And so this year, whatever the year after, he was narrating about, he was big in the black again, making more money. So I share that because I think that that's one of the biggest illusions that keeps people stuck, right? They're working a job so that one day they can take a vacation or one day they can retire. They're trying to accumulate a certain amount of money in their bank account so that they can feel safe, so that they can feel secure, so that they don't have to worry. And what I've found both personally with my clients and also in extensive research about this, just in focusing on it for the last 4 or 5 years, is that that is an illusion. The state of worry about money is an independent choice. It has nothing to do with how much money you have in the bank. And I know that sounds shocking, but it's the truth. So in fact, I just also heard a story recently. There was a guy who had like $100 million, very wealthy guy. And in the stock market crash in 2007, 2008, he lost half like overnight. So he's sitting with $50 million to his name, which for most of us is a mind-blowing amount of money. Like that's like, what? It's a huge, enormous sum of money for almost everyone on the planet. That would just be completely transformational. But for this guy, it was terrifying to have suddenly lost $50 million. And he was so scared, he committed suicide. He felt so ashamed of that loss. He felt so scared by that vulnerability that even with 50 million still in the bank, he was like, I'm done. This is too much for me. So the truth of financial freedom isn't the number. It's the understanding that you know how to bring in the money you want and need when you want and need it, period, the end. It's a skill set. It's not a number.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up because I think that that is a good perspective to have because I think sometimes we do get like, if we haven't had the experience of having a bunch of money, we just don't know what it feels like. And we don't know, what other people are experiencing with that. And I think it's a reminder too that there's no like right or wrong in general. Like we have to figure out what our goal amount is. We have to figure out how we feel about money. We have to work with our own money story. Nobody else can do that for us.
Yes. Amanda, the way that you speak about this is just so compassionate. I just appreciate how like you simultaneously are able to really understand the point of view of someone who's just beginning to think about this and really hold the container for that mental state and at the same time build a bridge from there to this more expansive visionary place. It's very cool to listen to you do it in real time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, everything you're saying is just really connecting with me. So I appreciate that. And I'm curious, I know we kind of dove in before a little bit into some of the first steps for getting started. So when somebody's kind of looked at, their relationship with money, like how do you start to, I guess, change that and allow more money to come in? Like if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, 10 times in my 3,000, like 30,000. Okay, this is the goal. I'm going to work towards this. I know there's blockages, but like, I'm going to do this. How do you actually like go about doing that?
So I'm going to give you 2 answers to this. The first is very, very practical. There's only 3 ways to increase your income. Very, very simple. One is to raise your prices. One is to help more people. So like if you're a yoga teacher and you do privates, to help more people privately. And the third is to help more people at a time. So maybe more group classes or more people inside your group classes. Or a combination of those 3. It's so simple. And so, the first one, raising prices, often makes people uncomfortable because of their own sense of worth and I think also a sense of possibility, like, I don't know if the market can handle it, that kind of story. The second one of helping more people often get stuck because they don't want to sell themselves. And so they aren't willing to put themselves out there or be visible because they're afraid of rejection or afraid of coming off as salesy or something like that. And the third, I actually, for your audience, I don't know if that's quite the issue, but there's a lot of people that I think struggle to just conceptualize how to scale. But those are solvable problems. The first one is a mindset issue. That's a solvable problem. The second one, also a mindset issue and perhaps a sales training issue, totally solvable problems. And third is an issue of perhaps mindset and for sure like logistics and strategy around scaling, also a solvable problem. The bigger thing that I think would be helpful to mention here is the 6-step framework that you and I have talked about, which is a little less about practicality, but I think worthwhile. And I'll just run through it really quickly. These are the 6 steps that I use to go from being a freaking high school math teacher in New York City public schools to having a 7-figure coaching business. And they are the same steps that I continue to use anytime I'm growing. They're the 6 steps that I teach all my clients. This is what works. So step 1 is to connect to the truth of your gift, the truth of your knowing. And as spiritual teachers, anyone listening to this, you've got this already or you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. But step 1 is like turn up the volume, right? Because this is where your fuel is going to come from. This is where you're going to feel like I have something to give. There's a reason that I was put here on this earth and I'm going to do it, right? Like I'm going to use this real estate that God gave me. I'm going to do good things with it. Sounds simple. Practice with meditation, practice with kirtan, practice with mantra. You can practice this in many different ways. Trust that you have the skill set that you need in order to work on this, but focus on it, prioritize it. Like come back to step 1 every single day. Step 2 is cultivating your relationship with your own desire. Wanting more is very critical. And this is a very spiritual thing to do because the soul is here for growth. All living things grow and then they die. And if they're not growing, they're dying. So the same is true with human beings. The difference with humans is that we have the power to choose. And so unlike most other living things, we can actually arrest our own growth. If you are wanting to lean into your soul's growth, you do that by getting interested in the things that you long for, the things that you want, whether it be love or impact or money or a deeper connection with the divine. It could even be with a cup of coffee. Like the material desires are also little seeds that take us closer to that. So these first 2 steps are very esoteric, really. It's not about going out and taking action. It's not about doing anything. It's about feeling the truth of what's already in you, the truth of your knowing and the truth of your desire. Once you have that, step 3 is finding a mentor. And everyone that's listening to this has already done that. They've chosen to listen to you, Amanda, if nothing else, right? Like they're going to yoga classes. This is happening in small ways all the time. And similarly, if you want to work on your money stuff, hiring a mentor who knows about money is going to be really helpful. Step 4 is making the decision to change. This is very uncomfortable. You can do all 3 first steps and not change your money relationship or your money dynamics, like how much you bring in, because it requires that you make the decision like, okay, I'm no longer going to do what I've done in the past. I'm going to do this new thing, and then doing it. Simple. It's not necessarily difficult, but it can be very uncomfortable. Step 5 is actually the strategy component. So doing the pricing or thinking about how you're going to work with people or how you're going to scale. And I really like to teach business planning through the lens of the relationship archetype. So like, who do you want to be in your business? Who do you want your to work with? Who do you want to serve? And what's it like for everyone in that relationship to be in the relationship? So it's more than just thinking about your ideal day. It's more than just thinking about your ideal client. It's actually thinking about how those 2 dance together, how they move together, how they weave together. And then the final step is sales mastery, which is honestly, my favorite spiritual practice in my life at this point. It's so confronting and liberating, mastering sales. So that took me a little longer than I was expecting, but those are the 6 steps. And I I believe in them. I practice them every day. And I highly recommend that people listen and just like take quick notes on those 6 steps so that you can return to them, think about them, chew on them, and let me know if you have any questions.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thanks for running through those. And I feel like there's so much good stuff in there. And yeah, I feel like actually like committing to the change is probably, I think when I think about them for myself and my own experience with this, like that definitely seems like the hardest. Like you can kind of get like jazzed up and start learning more and stuff, but it's like reworking your mental patterns is so hard. It is
Mm-hmm.
like such hard work to change the way you think about yourself and your offerings. And I feel like, as a yoga teacher, to go from feeling uncomfortable with being like, oh yeah, it costs like $50 for a private, but if you can't afford it, it's okay. Like we can do like a discount or a package or something to like,
Mm-hmm.
it's $150 an hour to work with me.
Period. The end. Oh,
Mhm.
I love
And
that.
then feeling good about it, right? Because then there can be all this like, oh my God, they're not answering. What's happening? Do they want to work with me? Oh my God, did I just lose a client? I mean, there's so much stuff that happens in that process. But I feel
Yes.
like the more you do it, the easier it gets to say this like higher rate that you offer or the rate in general that you offer.
Absolutely. I mean, we got to remember we were taught to not talk about money, even with our families in general. It's very, very unusual that you meet someone who's like, oh, yeah, we totally talk about finances at the dinner table. Like this is one of those taboo subjects. So in New York City, where I lived for so long, it was pretty common that we could ask each other how much we paid in rent. But that was very unusual. Like New York City culture talking around about the cost of rent was an exception to the cultural standard that we just don't talk about that. So just give yourself like a little break. It's like this is normal for it to be uncomfortable to mention money in any context, but certainly in the one where you're asking to be paid a certain amount. So a big part of what I teach is just welcoming the discomfort. It's like, okay, so what? You're uncomfortable. You guys are yoga teachers. You know what it's like to be uncomfortable and stay in the pose. Like you can do it. It's fine.
Mhm. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's kind of like it's like the real life yoga, really. Like
Yes.
that's what it is.
Yes. The real life yoga hashtag. It's so good.
Yeah, one of the things I'm curious about, Jesse, is kind of with the sales stuff. So if you're working on the money stuff and you're okay, I'm going to make this much money. This is what I'm going to have to do to increase my prices so that I can start making this goal income. And then you've got to bring in the people. So how do you kind of shift your mindset around like the sales side of things to start getting more people in the door?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think that it's like the secret that people don't want to talk about, that in every business, no matter what business you have, you're going to need to find new people always. That's what it means to be in business. Finding new people means helping more people. So there's always going to be more people that you're here to help. And I name that because I think that that's actually distinct from sales. Like I would call that lead generation in marketing language. And when you're starting your business, generally your leads, the people that you're here to serve, are either already in your community, you know them personally, or you know people that know them. So the first thing that I have almost all my clients do if they are coming to me just starting a business is to just literally call everyone they know and tell them what they're doing. Like, hey, I'm now doing online private and group yoga classes. Do you know anyone that would benefit from that? And of course, if you just work with women or you just work with postpartum moms or you just work with men over 60 or what, like you can be as precise as you know about your ideal client. Just literally getting on the phone and letting people know what you're doing is huge. I have like close friends who have, when we finally have the conversation about what they do, I'm like, oh, I just didn't know that. Like I was not in a position to think of them or refer them because they hadn't told me what they were doing. But if I know them and I care about them and I believe in them, I'm going to refer them for whatever it is that they're doing. So that's what I think of as like a referral call. And I think it does two really powerful things. One is it helps you get over whatever is stopping you from putting yourself out there. It lets you be seen in a relatively safe context because you're calling people that theoretically know you and care about you already. And it then also allows people to connect the neural network in their brain that says, okay, Amanda, podcast, yoga, coaching yoga teachers, like these are the things that I want to think about. So then when they hear someone in their community who's like, man, I'm just starting my yoga business, so I really need support. Oh, great. You should listen to this amazing podcast my friend Amanda does, right? Like that you're helping them connect the dots there. But then also many times when you call people and you say, hey, I'm doing this thing, do you know anyone that would benefit from this? They'll say, me, I would benefit from that. And so that's how I started. That's how I think most people are meant to start. All marketing and social media and everything else is an extension of that. It's really the same activity, just happening at scale. So that's the other reason that I like the calls, because then you're practicing in real time, like really letting yourself hear yourself say what you do. You're letting yourself experience the relationship with someone else. You're letting them tell, like you get feedback through every one of those conversations. It's a very professionalizing thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely makes sense. And thank you for sharing all those different tips. I think that there's a lot of good stuff in there. And sometimes it's just these little things that I think can be very big aha moments for somebody, or that can really help. Like one of the things that I tell people too when I'm working with them is like, oh, well, have you shared with the people in your life, like what you're doing, that you're doing this new program or this new class or this workshop? And they're like, no. Like, why don't we start there with the people you know? And I think
That's right.
I mean, I've definitely experienced this too. Like sometimes I think we maybe don't know that those people might be interested in it. And I think that exactly like you're saying, like just say, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you know anyone who's interested in it? Is this very open-ended question for like them to be like, oh, I'm actually interested in this thing. And it might be stuff you've never talked about over coffee or lunch or, at girls' wine night or something like that. But just having that specific ask can open up this huge door.
Exactly. This is the heart of networking, and it's going to be relevant for people throughout the life of their business. So almost all the beautiful, successful businesses that I know were built around a community that already existed. People that are champions for each other, that want each other to be successful, that refer each other. So all the success in business is based on relationship, based on connection. And so you guys already have relationships. You already have connection. The question is, what are you doing with them? And what are you allowing people to do with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's, not assuming that people in your network are maybe not interested or are interested in something. And I think that especially like if you go through like a big life change, like maybe the way that you did, and then I also had something similar in my journey to get to where I am now, where for a while I assumed that like the people I knew weren't interested in yoga. And then as I started asking, lots of people were like, oh, well, I'd actually like love to try a class or do one online or like work with you one-on-one. And I was like, wait, what? Oh, you've been here this whole time. Why have I been paying for Facebook ads?
Yes. Exactly. They teach this thing in any business context of the know, like, and trust factor. And there's a whole science to getting people to know, like, and trust you. But what we're talking about is working with the people who already know, like, and trust you. They may or may not be the people that you want to work with, like depending on the level of like depth of your work. You may not want to do that with your friends and family, but those people are definitely going to be great referral sources. So yeah, put yourself out there. Call everybody in your phone book. If you don't know them, if you don't have a relationship that's strong enough to feel like it is worthy of this conversation, why do you have them in your phone?
That's a good point, actually. I love that. And so one of the things you brought up earlier was, your business has been really thriving during the quarantine and the pandemic, which is amazing to hear. I'm really loving hearing all of the success stories that are coming out of the current situation. And I've heard lots of them, which has been amazing. One of the things I'm seeing that I'm not a big fan of is a lot of yoga teachers who are just teaching all of their stuff for free. And it was certainly something that I wasn't super pro before the pandemic. And I
Mm.
definitely have not changed my mindset around that. And I think that, one of the reasons is not because I'm like evil or awful, or I think that everyone's just rolling in money. I know that there's a lot of horrible situations, and I think that we can serve and support our communities in those types of situations. But in general, I'm like, yoga teachers need to eat too. Why all of a sudden has yoga become free? And
Mm.
so I'd love to hear kind of, your thoughts around like accepting money, but especially during a time of crisis or emergency when we really feel like, okay, now is not the time to be charging, or now is not the time to raise our prices or launch this new product. How do we kind of like push through that mindset?
It's a great question. My experience of this is that the questions, the mindset issues, the blocks that are coming up during the quarantine are actually the same issues that always come up. They're just a little extra clear. It's almost like the quarantine has bumped up the contrast on the image. So we can see more clearly, like, oh, here's where I want to give something up because I feel like I'm taking it from someone else. Or here's where I feel like I have to choose between me having my needs met and other people having theirs. Like, oh, all of what you're talking about is really based on a belief in scarcity. There's scarcity right now, therefore I should sacrifice. And it's just not true. The economic flow is moving at the same rate as it has always moved. It's just moved locations. So almost all the entrepreneurs that I know are making more money, not less right now, because they are entrepreneurial and they know how to be creative and use the whatever circumstances to continue to go deeper and expand and grow their business. That's a skill set that they learned from being resilient in all the other obstacles that have come up in the past. So there's always people that are suffering. There's always people that don't have enough food. There's always people that don't have enough healthcare. And I don't mean to minimize the reality of what's going on, but it's not like that's a new situation. We just are able to see it more clearly right now. And so I think that's it's like, okay, given that truth, given that human beings suffer, how do I want to show up? How do I want to serve? And so if somebody is in a position to be independently wealthy and they can just give it away, I think that's a legitimate choice. You can make that choice consciously. But if your business is teaching yoga, you got to trust that right now people need more yoga than they've ever needed it before. I mean, people can't leave their houses and go to yoga class, so they got to find it another way. My favorite yoga teacher of all time, like all time, met her in Brooklyn, took her class whenever I could in Brooklyn. Back in the day, this is like 15 years ago at least. I left New York, but before that, I think she moved. I can't even remember. She's been all over the place. Now she's in freaking Santa Fe or something. So we're not in the same place. But because of this quarantine, she's started teaching online. I can now study with my favorite yoga teacher again for the first time in like over a decade. Mm-hmm. The opportunities are as plentiful, if not more so. The need, the demand, the hunger for yoga teachings is as great as it's ever been, if not greater. So who is it serving to not sell it? I don't have an answer to that question. I don't think it's serving anyone. I think that's coming from just fear or scarcity consciousness.
Yeah, I think it is the scarcity, like you said. I think that it's like, the media tells us, all these awful things. And again, I don't want to downplay it either. I think that there's a lot of horrible stuff that's going on, but I think that there can also be horrible side effects of us not, valuing our worth and ourselves. And, when I see all these yoga teachers just jumping online and doing Facebook Lives for free, I work with studios that are online and they're thriving right now, but they're not going to thrive if all their teachers just teach for free. Because why would people pay if they think that something's valued at an amount that's free? And
the one thing I'll say about that is that I think that there's two pieces in what you're saying. One part is like where basically I'm going to like go hunting for the scarcity consciousness and attack it wherever it is. So like if the scarcity consciousness is coming from the individual yoga teachers, if they're giving it away because they feel like they have to, that's its own challenge. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, like yoga studios, this is a time for yoga studios to shift paradigms. And so if the fear is like, oh, if all the yoga teachers are now teaching for free, then the studio won't be able to make money anymore. I think that's just another example of scarcity consciousness. And I can use music as an example. right? Like
Yeah.
Spotify has made music free. And many musicians are still catching up. Like there are musicians out there who are still trying to make their money by selling music. That's not a viable option anymore. Really. I
Mm-hmm.
like that I can listen to anything for free right now. I don't have to buy any music ever. That shift has happened, but that doesn't mean that musicians can't make money. That it just demands, again, this resilience to use the circumstances that are arising to go deeper, to expand. You got to just know that there is possibility no matter what is happening. Whatever it is that you want, it's always possible. Always, 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 always. There is never a circumstance in which you cannot have what you want. That doesn't mean that it's going to be comfortable for you to have what you want. That doesn't mean that you necessarily know all the things that you need to know in order to receive what you want. It doesn't mean that you don't have to go through the discomfort of personal transformation in order to receive it. But if you can believe enough in your vision, enough in your desire to look for the possibilities, to look for the opportunities, I guarantee you will find them. Yoga studios, yoga teachers, all spiritual people. Everyone on the planet. This is true for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. And thanks for catching that sort of scarcity mindset that I was sitting in with the yoga studio stuff, because it is so true. I mean, if you have great teachers and you have a unique offering, or like you mentioned, you're online for the first time and now people from all over the world who have maybe passed through and practiced with you or practiced with you in another city can join you. I think that you've got, that's the secret sauce.
Yeah.
It's you. People are going to pay, $15 a class for that, as opposed to just doing a free class with maybe somebody that they don't connect with. So I think
Absolutely.
remembering the opportunity that's possible is really important.
There's one other little tidbit that I'll just throw in because I'm just making a connection as I listen to you, which is that I think in general, the internet has, in some fields slowly and in some fields very rapidly, but kind of in 2020, it's kind of true in all fields. It's made information accessible and free. And so where before people could make money by selling information, that's not really relevant anymore. What people want to pay for now is quality time with people that they respect, that they want to learn from. They will pay for transformation. So I'm saying this because just in the last 2 years, that's really completely transformed in the coaching industry, where 2 years ago, you could still kind of get away with selling some instructional materials. And now it's like it doesn't really do much. Mostly people want to get FaceTime. They want to get in front of you. They want to get your eyes, your expertise on their specific question, on their specific life, on their specific business, on their specific problem. And so there has actually been a trend in my work, in my business, of giving away things that we previously would only have sold. If it falls into the category of information, if it's things that used to be online courses, we're now just repurposing that content and giving it away. And trusting that people having more access to the information will help them self-select. If they want actually to be the person who wants to step in, great, they will. And if the information gives them the feedback that actually this is not a fit, great, then they go find the information and the relationship that's going to guide them in the next direction. So it may be that what you're describing, it could be the wave of some new trend in yoga that's actually really empowering for all people, that makes yoga technology available to way more people. And still, the individuals who have tremendous mastery are going to have people who want to get closer to them, who want more of their FaceTime. And I think it demands some resilience and some flexibility, some agility in the way that you think about your business. But the opportunity is, again, it's always there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's, one of the things I'm really curious about with the current situation is just how things shift. I know there's a lot of conversation around, words thrown out like normal and reopening and going back to normal. And, sure, I think there's things that will return to how they were before this. But I think that this is also, I think that things are going to shift in a more permanent way in some ways. And I am curious to see how the yoga industry particularly shifts with that, because, we've, the studio that I work with here in my hometown in Alberta in Canada, we're in a tourist town. There's people that are joining and tuning in from all over the world who haven't had the chance to make it back to the Canadian Rockies. And, similar to what you're describing with your teacher, it's like they can practice with these teachers that they know and love for the first time since they were here last. And it's an opportunity that I don't know that we considered was possible before. And I think it's definitely like making the conversation from the management side of things, be a little bit interesting. Like, what do things look like when we can have people back in the studio? Yet we still will have the internet. So maybe there's the capacity for both. And
yes,
I love having those conversations because I think it just brings this like light of possibility, like what is possible for this studio. Now it feels like there's something possible for, a lot of yoga teachers and a lot of yoga studios that wasn't before, or maybe that they weren't aware of was there before. And I think that like being able to open a door, like if it was open a crack before, now we've like thrown it open. It's like we can walk through and see what's on the other side.
Right. Yeah, I love that. As I was listening to you, it reminded me of the way that Ram Dass spoke about his relationship to his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, after his guru died, after he left his body. And there just feels like something relevant to that. It's like when one thing dies, another thing emerges. And the way that Ram Dass talked about that relationship was that because the physical body wasn't there anymore, he was kind of forced to go deeper. He was forced to look for the heart of that relationship on the soul level, which had always been there. That's always what he was most excited about, but he was attaching it to the physical body. And so as painful and challenging as it was to lose that physical relationship, it actually is part of what catalyzed his deepening growth inside the relationship. And I think that the same thing is happening. I love your question about what's going to happen to yoga. And I really see that it's deepening because people can't just go for the workout. They can't just go and like put on their leggings and like get on the mat in the room and then go back to their lives and do whatever. Like there is a call for more integration to bring that yoga into their daily life. And the fact that they can't go into the studio and have to do it in their home may actually be one of the best things that could happen to yoga, because it's sort of like without even trying, anyone who's doing yoga right now is doing it in their own space, in their own PJs or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really inspiring. Whatever happens after this, yoga is positioned to explode and to help more people and to help them more deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. And, hopefully this conversation can be a piece of the puzzle that helps inspire yoga teachers to get in touch with their own, mindset and around money and the money they're bringing in. And hopefully it helps them create successful businesses. And when I say that, I mean, whatever you've defined for yourself as success, but help them create successful businesses. So Jesse, I could keep you on the phone like for the rest of the day. I'm like watching the clock. Like I'm sure she's got, other things to do. I have loved talking with you. So I'm so glad we got to connect today.
Me too. This was great. It was great. I love your service in the world. I think it's a testament to what's possible, right? Like you and I would never have met if we didn't have the internet. So you paved the way for this work to happen. I really appreciate your leadership in this space.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you for being a longtime listener of the show. And if people want to learn more about you and your offerings, maybe work with you, where can they go to find them?
Jessie Johnson Coaching is my handle on Instagram. It's my website. That's the best place to go. And we're also going to give you guys a free meditation if you go to jessiejohnsoncoaching.com/wealth. There's a great meditation, a little exercise to do. So if you feel like there's a little bit more for you, then click on that, totally free. And we're posting great content all the time on YouTube, Instagram, all the platforms. So whatever you want, you can find.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. I'll make sure there's links for all of that and that people can get that freebie. And thank you again for your time and for having this conversation with me.
It's such an honor. I wish you all the best always.
Thank you. You too. Thank Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of the podcast. To find links, notes, resources, and everything mentioned in today and all episodes of the show, you can head on over to mbomeyoga.com. You can find the podcast and myself on Facebook and social media at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And I would love for you to join the private Facebook community, Yoga Business Badasses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please make sure you reach out to me at info@mbomeyoga.com. And last of all, if you enjoyed this episode of the show, please make sure you hit subscribe and leave a review for the podcast. It would mean the world. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Namaste.